The Greyhound bus station in Pittsburgh buzzed with noise, artificial lights, and a constant flow of people carrying suitcases, dreams, and exhaustion. Outside, the rain fell hard, pounding the metal roof as if the sky wanted to speak. On one of the less crowded platforms, Marion Roberts moved forward with a firm but weary step, dragging a worn backpack, her white nursing uniform stained from an endless shift at the hospital. Her phone showed 10:46 p.m., and she still had to catch a bus to Erie. Or judgment, but with something she hadn't felt in years: compassion. He looked directly at her, and without raising his voice said, "You don't have to run, Marion. The storm isn't outside." Her heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? She took a step back, confused, her breathing agitated. She thought about calling for help, but something inside told her there was no danger. On the contrary, there was a calmness that enveloped her, as if this cold corner of metal and concrete had. Lunatic that roamed the station. Before she could react further, her mind made a leap. She remembered her daughter asleep, her mother bedridden, her ex-husband absent for 10 years, and she felt alone, more alone than ever. "I don't have time for this," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Exactly, because you don't have time. That's why you're here," he replied with a gentleness that pierced. An announcement of a bus echoed through the speakers. Marion looked at the screen. Her departure. She realized something. In the middle of the crowded station, no one else seemed to see him. People passed by as if he didn't exist. Fear mixed with strange hope. She was dreaming. God was testing her. Who was this man? If this story has already captured you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. This is just the beginning. The rain continued to pound the station's glass windows with an almost hypnotic persistence. Marion remained seated on the metal bench, her arms crossed. Toward her, and his eyes seemed to light up. "It's not that others don't see me. They're just not ready to look. And you are. Are you tired of running?" Marion clenched her teeth. Her first impulse was to stand up and leave, but something in those words struck deep. She had been running for years. Yes, from memories, from debts, from pain. "What do you mean by saying you know me? Have you been alone since you were 12? she asked. That was the first time you said in your mind, "No one will." Doesn't make sense. I don't know if you're playing with me, but if this is a joke, stop. I'm not here to confuse you. I'm here because you asked me to. What? 3 days ago at dawn you said, "If you exist, send me a sign." The air became thicker. Marion felt her chest burn. She remembered that night perfectly. She had come home after a double shift. She found her mother delirious with fever, her daughter hungry, the kitchen cabinet empty. She fell to her knees in the kitchen and whispered, "Blood, call me whatever you like. What matters isn't what I'm called, but whether you're ready to listen." Before Marion could reply, an alarm sounded through the speakers. A child was lost in the station. Voices began to rise. People crowded in the hallways, but the man remained there looking at her. And Marion knew, without knowing why, that she couldn't walk away from him. Marion tightened her lips, lowered her gaze, and took a couple of steps back as if she needed space to breathe. Young man with an easy smile and a loud motorcycle. Her parents didn't approve, but she, rebellious and hungry for affection, threw herself headlong into the abyss. By 18, she was pregnant, and he disappeared the moment he found out. He never came back, never answered a call, never knew the daughter he left behind. Marion worked at whatever she could find, sold candy in the streets, was a waitress, worked at a bakery. With effort and tears, she managed to pay for a technical nursing course. Much abandonment? Where was he when Marion cried alone with a feverish daughter in her arms and no money for medicine? "I cried many times," Marion murmured, still with her eyes closed, "for someone to hear me, to give me a sign. Nothing, just silence." A part of her hated herself for what she felt, for that bitterness. But another part just wanted to rest, to release that invisible weight that doubled her over inside. She opened her eyes. The man was still there, looking ahead as if he heard. Why her father doesn't love her. I was there, Marion, when you sold your first plate of food in the street, when you knelt down hungry and still shared your bread with an old woman, when you touched your daughter's forehead in fever, sleepless for 2 days. I was there. She trembled. Not from cold, but from the intensity of that certainty. Part of her wanted to believe. Another part, still hurting, resisted. Then why didn't you speak to me before? Because your heart was still closed, Marion. Ran her hand across her face, trying to regain control of her thoughts. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but something more urgent interrupted her confusion. She reached into her back pocket, searching for her wallet. It wasn't there. She checked the backpack, nothing. The side pouch was empty. No, no, this can't be, she whispered, opening the main zipper quickly. She threw her things on the bench, searching desperately. Papers, pens, an old credential, but her wallet had disappeared. Oh. Serene voice behind her. Don't search for what's already gone. Search for who needs it more than you. She spun around. The man was still there, as if he hadn't moved at all. What are you saying? You saw it. Do you know who stole from me? It's not a theft. It's a calling. Marion looked at him with barely contained fury. I'm not in the mood for games. I need that money. My mom is sick. Do you know what it means to lose everything now? Yes, that's why you need to go to Corridor 6. A woman. Then, as if driven by a force she didn't understand, she walked there, past a pillar. A woman was fainting. No one seemed to notice. Marion ran and caught her before she fell. Ma'am, can you hear me? The woman was breathing with difficulty. Her skin was pale and her pulse weak. Marion, on instinct, pulled out her stethoscope, remembered her training, and began applying emergency measures. She called for help. Soon a guard came, then a cleaning employee. Call an ambulance, Marion ordered. Life. She returned to the platform. The man was waiting for her, standing this time with a serene expression. You did well. Marion said nothing, just looked at him with her heart in her throat. And in the midst of the chaos of her night, she felt something strange. Peace. The air in the station had changed. It wasn't just the smell of moisture or the echo of rain that persisted in pounding the roof. It was something else. Something subtle and tangible. Marion, standing by the platform, looked. Less than an hour, she had moved from disbelief to wonder, from anger to gratitude. And now, while mechanical announcements repeated through the speakers, something else began to happen. An elderly man with a coffee-stained apron approached with slow steps. He carried a cart with thermoses and foam cups. He stopped in front of the stranger and looked at him with narrowed eyes. Do we know each other? he asked in a hoarse voice. The man looked at him with a slight smile. Many years ago, in a... Trusting, she approached cautiously, looking first at Marion, then at the man. "You're the one from my dream," she said without preamble. The man nodded gently. "What did you see?" "That you gave me bread and a blanket, and that I wasn't afraid anymore." The girl couldn't be more than 10 years old. Marion felt a sharp pain in her chest seeing her. She recognized that gaze. It had been her own when she was that age. Hunger, cold, abandonment. "What's your name?" Marion asked, approaching. "Happening here?" Marion whispered. The coffee vendor, without taking his eyes off the man, replied, "I don't understand it, ma'am, but when I see him, I remember who I was before fear, and that hasn't happened to me in 30 years. Marion felt a chill. "Do you think he might be—" "I don't know, but what he says reaches the heart, and that's a miracle these days." Sophie leaned her head on the man's shoulder, as if she had finally found the place where she could rest. He stroked her hair. Vendor's cart, abandoned to the side, released warm vapor. Everything seemed suspended in sacred silence. Then a scream broke the calm. "My daughter! Help me, please! My daughter is lost." A woman's desperate voice echoed through the hallway. Marion turned immediately. A middle-aged woman with soaked hair and trembling hands ran through the crowd showing a photo on her phone. The guards didn't seem to react with the necessary urgency. "Sophie!" The woman cried out. "Her name is Sophie. Marion." Asked the attendants, checked every corner of the hallway, climbed stairs, descended ramps. Nothing. Her heart pounded hard. A mixture of fear, rage, and confusion drove her forward. They can't have just disappeared like that. She arrived at the lost and found a small room with metal doors where only employees entered. She was about to pass when she heard something. A whisper, a breath. She pushed the door without thinking. There, on a low bench, Sophie slept wrapped in a blue blanket. Beside, that's all that matters. The woman looking for her daughter came running behind, guided by a guard. When she saw Sophie, she cried out in relief and hugged her tight. "My love, never let go of me again, please." Marion stood slowly, looked at the man. "Did you do this?" She just needed someone to see her. Not all children are born of blood. Before Marion could respond, Another guard entered the room. Who opened this door? It's been locked since this afternoon. Everyone fell silent. Marion. Others ate what little they had. The rain had decreased, leaving a damp smell of old concrete. Marion sat alone in a corner of the main hallway with her heart pounding. Sophie slept with her head in her lap, while her mother talked with the guards explaining the situation. The man had vanished again. "Where did you go?" Marion murmured, looking around. Her mind was saturated. Nothing made sense. Nothing followed the rules of the world as she knew it. Who was this man? How did he know so much? How? Never stopped drinking. Marion, meanwhile, was silent. Only one question consumed her inside. Why had God taken her brother? The only one who protected her from everything. That night, she made a silent promise. If this is what God does, I don't want to know anything about him. Since then, whenever someone talked about faith, miracles, or prayer, she closed off. She said she didn't have time for that prayers didn't fill plates or cool fevers, that miracles were stories for those who didn't. Opened her eyes. The man was there again, standing, and no one else noticed him. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Where do you come from? What are you?" "What matters isn't who I am, Marion. It's who you can become if you stop living in fear." She swallowed. "It's not that simple. You don't know what I've been through." "Yes, I do. That's why I'm here." Marion looked at him intently. His eyes remained the only constant amid the chaos. Those eyes that weren't of this world, but saw her. Toward the back of the station. No one else saw him. No one else reacted. Marion wanted to follow, but her legs didn't respond. All she could do was stay there, looking into the darkness of that hallway, knowing she wasn't the same anymore. And for the first time in many years, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. The clock showed 1:25 a.m., and the station, though quieter, wasn't fully asleep. Marion remained seated with Sophie still sleeping in her lap. In her chest, a silent battle. Intervened, who was also there. He's just talked to us. That's not a crime. Who gave you permission to stay here all night? Who is this guy? He doesn't even have papers. We don't need papers to be people, said a woman softly, hugging her daughter. He told us things no one else knows, words that heal. He's a charlatan, another man shouted. What if he's a dangerous lunatic? Marion made her way through the crowd, pushing through until she stood in front of the guard. He hasn't hurt. Are followed here. You have no right to preach or cause crowds. I didn't call anyone. They came on their own. The crowd murmured, some for him, some against. Marion could feel the tension rising, the atmosphere charging like before a storm. This looks like a cult, a young man shouted. Throw him out. That's when the man took a step forward with a calmness that disarmed everyone. Why do you fear silence so much? Why does it hurt so much to look inward? The guard stepped closer, pulled out. Slowly, as if an invisible weight pushed them to reflect. No one raised their voice again. Marion breathed heavily, as if she'd just run a marathon. She looked at the man. He simply watched her with tenderness. Why don't you defend yourself? She asked, still moved. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be present. Marion closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the hallway was no longer full. The crowd had dissolved, but something had remained something. Would change everything. Sophie slept peacefully, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside Marion. She sat beside her, stroked her hair, and closed her eyes for a few seconds. A question settled in her mind like a seed. What will I do now? Her life had always had a plan. Work, survive, care. There was no space for deep questions or faith. Everything was urgent. Everything was practical. But now there was something asking for more, something inviting her to stop, to look. Marion washed dishes with slow, dull movements. No one knocked on her door. No one was waiting for her. She felt nothing, just emptiness. And then, in the same dream, another image, the same kitchen, but with laughter, children, steaming food, hands helping. Sophie sitting beside her, now a teenager, reading to her aloud, an elderly woman receiving bread. Marion embracing a tearful mother. Her house was a refuge, her heart a home. She woke startled. The dream still pulsed in her body. She looked. Fail only when we deny what the heart asks of us, not when we try. Marion remained silent. She looked at her hands, hardened by work, trembling with emotion. She had never felt so alive or so vulnerable. What do I have to do? Listen and act. The time to run is over. The ring outside stopped. A ray of light slipped through a crack in the broken roof. It was just an instant, but it illuminated exactly where she sat. Marion saw it, felt it, and couldn't help but smile through tears. The man. She had to close one cycle before starting another. Sophie still slept, clutching her backpack. Marion got up carefully, found her phone in her bag, and dialed a number she hadn't touched in over 10 years. She waited. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, until a hoarse voice answered. "Who is this?" "It's me, Dad." There was a long silence and a clearing of throat. "Marion?" "What? What happened? Are you okay?" "I need to see you today." He didn't ask more. Just gave an address on the. "Hello, daughter." Marion didn't respond, just looked at him. He took a step forward, then another, but stopped before touching her. "I didn't expect this. I thought I no longer existed for you." "For a long time you didn't," she answered quietly. The man lowered his gaze. "I know. I have no excuses. I don't want them." They stood like that, face to face, with all the pain of the past floating between them. Then Marion spoke. "I only came to tell you that I don't hate you anymore, that I—" Where love isn't a memory, but a certainty. The man nodded without daring to ask for more. "Can I see her someday?" "Maybe, but first I need to see you change." Marion said goodbye without hugs, without promises, just with a firm look. She returned to the station. She took Sophie's hand, and together they boarded the first bus to Erie. As they traveled, Marion looked out the window. The dry landscape and low hills stretched like a familiar canvas, but inside her, everything was different. Back, and she smiled because now she knew. She had begun to walk. 3 days had passed since that night at the station in Pittsburgh. Marion had returned to Erie, where her mother rested, weaker but still aware. Sophie slept each night beside her, clinging to a broken doll she'd found in the trash. The house was humble, with walls stained by time and the constant buzz of an old fan. But something made her feel more alive than ever, the certainty that she was no longer running. However, there, downtown Market, people spoke of a man who seemed to come from another world and had touched many souls. When she arrived, she asked between fruit stands, crafts, women selling baked goods. Everyone knew of someone who had seen him. Some called him the one who heals with words. Others called him the wanderer without a shadow. Did you know him? Marion asked a bread vendor. Not personally, but a friend of mine left her violent husband after talking to him. She said he looked at her and knew. Want to understand why he chose me to listen? Maybe it wasn't a choice. Maybe you asked him too, but forgot you did. That phrase left her silent for hours. In Memphis, an old woman showed her a child's drawing taped to the wall of her house. A man in simple clothes surrounded by children. My grandson drew it. He says that man hugged him when he was crying because his mom left. Where did he see him? Right here in the park, but no one else saw him. Just him. Marion closed her notebook and sat. Transformation. Everyone who had seen him shared a wound and a hope. And though she didn't know when she would see him again, Marion no longer needed him to continue because the real miracle wasn't him. It was what awakened in those who listened. 2 days had passed since Marion left Memphis. Each step took her further from the noise of the city and closer to a deep silence, almost spiritual. She had heard about a small town in the hills of Tennessee where a woman claimed to have seen the man. Not to look inward. Yes, I saw him, Martha said, sitting in her kitchen grinding coffee with wrinkled hands. He arrived one day without warning, with a smile that wasn't of this world. What did he say to you? That the tree that gives no shade can still bear fruit if given time. Marion looked at her in silence. She didn't fully understand. And what did you do? I cried because for years I thought my life no longer made sense. I lost my children, my husband, my faith. I felt dry, without. Does that mean, Martha smiled with tenderness, that you stop asking questions and start giving? Marion lowered her gaze. She had always lived searching for understanding, rationalizing, measuring. But all this went beyond that. I'm no one, she murmured. Just a woman who has suffered, who has made mistakes, who doesn't know what to do with so much. That's exactly why, Martha said, serving some herbal tea. Because you know what it's like to need. Because you know hunger, loss, anger. Turned the pages' names of strangers, short phrases, big decisions. She wrote slowly. I'm going to be the sign I always waited for. I don't just want to believe anymore. I want to build. She closed the notebook. Martha looked at her with silent pride. Then, daughter, are you ready? Marion left the house with her heart beating differently. The sky was overcast, but it didn't rain. And though she didn't see the man that day, she felt he had been there again, guiding her, because sometimes it's called it Hope House, a space for single mothers, abandoned children, elderly people without family, without flags, without empty promises, without speeches, just service, just presence. Sophie, now calmer, studied in the morning at a public school and helped in the kitchen in the afternoons. Marion had started the legal process to adopt her. The girl held to her with fierce love and silent trust. "Am I really your daughter now?" she asked each night. "You always were. We're just putting it on." Had to face bureaucracy, distrustful neighbors, scarcity of resources. But she never gave up, not because she had no fear, but because she wouldn't let fear decide anymore. "How do you keep smiling?" a young volunteer asked her one rainy day. "Because I've tried living without hope and don't want to go back," she replied. On Saturdays they held community work days, cleaned streets, planted trees, organized meals. Marion didn't talk about religion, didn't impose anything, but those who knew her. Held her hand. "Because you do matter. You just forgot because of what broke you." That night Marion wrote in her journal, "Every day someone arrives broken inside, and every day we stitch her together with invisible threads that others offer without asking for anything." The man's face no longer appeared in her dreams, but his voice did. Sometimes, amid exhaustion, she heard his phrases like soft echoes. "The shade you give isn't always seen, but someone is grateful for it." And then she smiled. Something stirred like a premonition. She got up silently, went out to the porch, and sat on a wooden bench. She looked at the stars, remembered her brother, her father, the gray days, and thought about all that had happened since that night in Pittsburgh. She closed her eyes for an instant, and then saw him not as before, not in front of her or walking. She saw him in her mind, clear, serene, the same face, the same clear eyes. He stood by a leafy tree with his arms open. "You're not alone." Daughter again. We hadn't spoken in years. Another from Memphis. He taught me that my pain didn't make me less, that my story could heal others too. And so on, one after another, strangers from across the country who shared how that man had appeared in their paths. They didn't talk about physical miracles, but about looks, words, silences that had changed their lives. How is this possible? Marion murmured through tears. Mr. Davis appeared at the doorway with a cup of coffee. He's still. Knowing each other, shared the same message. That love isn't begged, it's offered. That faith isn't imposed, it's lived. That there is light even when everything seems lost. That morning a teenager arrived at the shelter. She was dirty, with a cut on her forehead and eyes full of rage. Marion didn't ask anything, just hugged her, took her to the bathroom, gave her clean clothes, then sat her down to eat. "Why are you helping me?" The girl asked. "Because I was once where you are, and someone saw." Holding her hand. They had traveled there to attend a meeting of volunteers from different states. It was the first time they had traveled together since Hope House opened. Sophie wore a simple dress, but walked with her head high, like someone who knows she belongs. They stopped in front of the cathedral. Marion lifted her gaze toward the towers and sighed. Not from nostalgia, but gratitude for everything that had been and everything that now was. "Can we go in?" Sophie asked. "Of course." Center. The streets were alive with colors, street vendors, musicians, and entire families. Marion observed everything with different eyes. Each face spoke to her of hidden stories, internal battles, invisible wounds. And she felt with each step that she was part of something much larger. They passed in front of a man sitting on the ground, covered by an old blanket. His head was down, his feet bare, holding a handwritten sign. Marion stopped. Something about his posture, his silence, moved. Her station now shone within her. Hours later, at the bus station waiting for their return, while she leaned against a column and looked around, she remembered. The cold metal, the distant voices, the murmur of announcements, all the same. And yet, everything different. "If I see you again," she thought, "I won't ask questions. I'll just say thank you." She breathed deeply, closed her eyes for a moment, and smiled, because she finally understood that the miracle wasn't finding Jesus at a